I wanted to go ahead and get us started. So I'm Drew Kirchhoff. I'm chair of the biology department here at Kenyon, and it's been a real joy to plan with Lori and Rin and Jan. Putting this event together has been a really fun process, and we're really excited that it's finally happening. So it's my job to sort of get us started on the panel that we originally called the Transformation of Women Faculty at Kenyon. Though I think really a better name for it is the Transformation of Kenyon College by Women Faculty. I think that's actually more of what we're going to do. I want to take just a moment to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to invite them each to come up here to the front and stand to present to you. So I'm going to go in order of arrival at Kenyon. So Rita Kipp received her PhD in anthropology from the University of Pittsburgh and joined Kenyon's anthropology department in 1976. Scholar of both anthropology and Asian studies, she was named the first Robert A. Dean Jr. Professor in 2000, and in 2003 moved into Kenyon's administration as Associate Provost. Rita left Kenyon in 2004 to become Dean of the College at Sewanee University of the South, and subsequently served as Dean and/or Provost at Marietta College and Georgian Court University, from which she is retiring this year. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. So this is Rita. Joan, is it Kathryn or Kathryn? Had a PhD in history and philosophy of science with a specialization in medieval Europe when she joined the all-male history department at Kenyon in 1978. Her colleagues thought someone should teach the history of women. Guess who? She thought, just because I am a woman and a feminist doesn't mean I know anything about women's history. But she said, okay. By 1983, she was with Rin in the first faculty group to offer INDS 1-2 Women's Studies.
Yay! We have members of that class here. We're in that first class.
That teaching reoriented her research. Since then, she has written about medieval women's scientific knowledge and about medieval scientific and medical explanations of sex determination, gender differences, and sexual desires. Both those deemed natural and those deemed unnatural. In 1996, she left for the University of California, Davis, where she was a member of the Cross-Cultural Women's History Group, and from which she retired in 2008. Welcome, Joan. Laura Turner is joining us from Kenyon's Physics Department, where she joined an also all-male faculty in 1992. She's currently chair of the department. An astronomer, Paula works with Kenyon students at the Miller Observatory to measure and model pulsating variable stars. She also directs a 2-week summer program for undergraduates at the Mount Wilson Observatory in California. She served as Associate Provost from 2006 through 2010, and in 2016 was awarded the Kenyon Trustees Award for Teaching Excellence. Welcome, Paula. And finally, So Irene Lopez is the most recent addition on this panel. She joined us in 2007 and is now Associate Professor of Psychology. She teaches in the Psychology Department for Women's and Gender Studies and Latino Studies concentrations. Born and raised in the Bronx, Dr. Lopez is the first in her family to have attended college and did her undergraduate degree at Vassar. After graduating from Vassar, she lived abroad in India for a brief period of time, and this experience shaped her interest in culture and distress. She attributes her success here at Kenyon to the kindness and generosity of her mentors, many of whom were women. So with that, I'll let our panelists get started, and we look forward to hearing what you're going to say. I thought maybe we'd go in order of arrival, so Rita, if you want to start us off.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to come back to Kenyon. Regardless of where I live, Kenyon and Gambier are always home to me, and it's just great to be back here on the occasion of celebrating Ren Edwards, who means a lot to me. I'm going to talk about 4 things today. I want to start with the context of my coming to Kenyon, what it was like in those years for me. I want to talk about the burdens and opportunities of tokenism. I want to talk about a new kind of connection to students that women faculty found here at Kenyon. At least it was new for me. And finally, to point out that women faculty led the incorporation of gender and women into the curriculum at Kenyon. So let's start with my early years. I arrived in 1976, and Kenyon had become co-ed only only 7 years before. I know because the last institution I retired from had been a women's college that went co-ed in 2011, that anytime you could make that transition, it is an adjustment that the institution has to make. And as was pointed out in the last session, in that era when many male colleges were turning co-ed, it was not from any principled commitment to equal education for men and women. It was because the survival of those institutions depended on bringing women in. But once the financial decision had been made to go co-ed, I believe that here and really elsewhere, for the most part, people wanted to get it right. You know? That is to do right by the young women who came to enroll. Kenyon's adjustments to coeducation in 1976 were still going on, very much in process. And these adjustments included adding a whole new department that people supposed would teach subjects attractive to women, namely anthropology and sociology. That's how I got here. Gradually, it was understood, too, that we would add women to the faculty across the curriculum. But in certain disciplines, and in particular in the sciences, where the percentage of women in those disciplines had been historically low, that proved difficult to do in some cases. I think it's well to remember, too, that Kenyon's adjustment to coeducation was occurring also when many of the new women hired to come here were discovering the politics of feminism. That was certainly true for me. A number of the women hired here in those early years were not happy. Several of them filed grievances based on charges of discrimination. And in fact, the position into which Rich and I were hired to share was a position vacated by a woman who left under a cloud of acrimony, a very unhappy woman. And sometimes people reassured me that I was so much nicer. I was so much easier to work with than she had been. But I suspect that those pioneering figures were probably not that different from me. And their persistent pointing out where Kenyon was falling short in its quest to do justice to women, their shrillness, which was the term always lobbed against women who spoke out, in those days anyway, their shrillness had cleared a path for me. And of course it was easier for me to be nice, because they had already helped to educate colleagues about, well, you shouldn't say that, or pointing out where Kenyon needed to do a better job. What only thing I needed to do was kind of nudge or remind people about messages that they had already heard. Second, the burdens and opportunities of tokenism. When women on the faculty were still relatively few, those of us experienced the meaning of tokenism. Suddenly it seemed necessary that women be represented on committees, standing committees of the faculty, ad hoc committees such as search committees. And what this means is that when there aren't very many women on campus, those few women are doing a lot of service. We were asked to serve beyond what was expected of new male faculty members in that time. And this was a burden because we were also learning how to teach. They don't teach you that in graduate school, The teaching load was 3-3. Many of us had small children. Many of us still wanted to continue our research programs. And then we had all this service to do. Now, on the other hand, I think we all, and certainly I, and I think really all of the early women who came, understood why it was important that we do this token service, that we be the token woman on the Faculty Affairs Committee or on a search committee. We knew that having women's voices and perspective on who gets to come to campus for an interview, things like that were important, and so we did it. I think I served on at least 2, maybe 3 search committees in physics in my time, and probably another couple in chemistry. And I think I made a difference. I think my voice was listened to. Things didn't always turn out like I wanted, but I was there and I was in the mix of the discussions, and I think that was important. I think my colleagues welcomed my participation. At the same time, too, our extra burden of service was also an opportunity, giving us a jump start on understanding how a small college works, how faculty politics work at the college level, when many of us had never thought much beyond the confines of our disciplines and our little, departments. And of course, it was not just membership on committees, it was often leadership of committees. For example, in the wake of the Title IX legislation, which Buffy pointed out, it was 1972, Bill Jordan formed a committee on equal opportunity and in athletics. That was 1978, and he asked me to chair that committee. 1978. I wasn't even 30 years old. I had been at Kenyon only, a year. And I had no illusions that I was asked to do that because of my vast knowledge of athletics or the academy or anything. I was asked to do that because I was a woman. And okay, yes, it was a big responsibility. The people sitting around that table were all senior to me. Dean Edwards, the athletic director, every senior, member, the faculty were there represented in their senior roles. And here I was, Rita Kipp. 8 years old, what do I know? But I did it, and I think that was one of the things that began to push me beyond the wheelhouse of my discipline. And that and other opportunities for leadership were very significant in my professional development. And they were, although I didn't know it at the time, preparing me for administrative leadership long before I even knew I wanted to do that. So I'm grateful for those opportunities. Third, a new kind of connection to students is what I found here. I look back so fondly on some friendships with women students that emerged in my first decade at Kenyon. In particular, student feminists who were leaders of the Women's Center were looking for role models and mentors among faculty women. And they hosted a weekly dinner in the dining hall with faculty members inviting men and women faculty to hear their concerns and for us to tell them our opinions. They listened to what we had to say. It was a total kind of almost egalitarian dialogue. I'm not sure whether those students realized how important that was to me as an overworked young faculty woman. But some of them did, because Anara Gard, to name a couple of names, Kaylin Johnson, leaders of the Women's Center, kept in touch with me for years, and I treasure the friendship that formed around that table. Finally, women faculty led the incorporation of gender and women into the curriculum. It's hard to think back when Kenyon's curriculum was so inveterately classical, based around traditional disciplinary boundaries. There was the interdisciplinary program in humane studies, which is all sort of this, and I was reminded of synoptics as an option. That's a Kenyon term, the synoptic major. You could sort of cobble together an interdisciplinary thing as an individual, but there was no international studies, no Asian studies, no environmental studies in those days, no sort of interdisciplinary conversations organized in that structural level. So teaching about women and gender seemed, by comparison to these traditional disciplines, undisciplined, and had to kind of always scrabble to assert its legitimacy as an intellectual endeavor. Still, courses about women and gender did begin to appear in departmental curricula in English, in history, thanks to Joni, in anthropology, thanks to me, and increasingly survey courses or other courses began, although they were not exclusively about women, began to include some content of that type. Of course, a great deal of the content in the so-called hard sciences and mathematics does not easily lend itself to that kind of content incorporation, also called mainstream. Rather, in the sciences, the burning question is, it seemed to me, why did so many women students find these subjects unappealing? Or, if appealing on an intellectual level, uninviting as a possible major and career path? It was here that some of the new women hired in that first decade that I was here played such an important role, and among them, Lynn Edwards. who realized that women's studies is about more than just the course content. It's also about the pedagogies and practices of the classroom, of the lab. How might a feminist teach so that both the female and male students are more empowered and more inspired to take charge of their own learning? And I'm going to describe what I remember or have constructed in my memory. It may not be right. I'm sure Rin will say it right. How Rin, a pedagogy that Rin used to use that I so admired. And it went something like this. Students were asked to read a scientific article 3 times. The first time through, and then talk about it, in class. You read it, you come back, you talk about it. The first time it was just like, okay, what is this article about? A kind of global sense of what's the author trying to do? Second time you read it through, it was, all right, slow down, be sure you understand every word in this article. Scientific term, English word, whatever it is, understand every word. And then, okay, now what do you understand about this article? Third time through, what are the assumptions that are kind of unspoken here? What are the sources of authority on which the arguments are based? And this kind of pedagogy teaches a number of important things. First of all, and this is important, students learn that you have to read some things more than once, and very carefully. But beyond that, they learn that scientific authority, as expressed in articles, is always based on assumptions and interpretations of data. Although the presentation of scientific knowledge in textbooks often obscures that uncertainty, obscures the debates and the disagreements that are in reality the heart of doing science. And 3, Rin students learn that they have the prerogative and the power to pick apart the assumptions of an argument, the sources of scientific knowledge. This was a thoroughly feminist pedagogy, and one that gave students, too, the sense that they could learn to read and think like scientists. Thank you.
It's 1978, and Rin and I have just arrived before the semester. She's got her PhD and a classy Yale postdoc behind her, and I'm walking down the bio department, the bio building hall towards her office, and I'm passing the offices, Dr. Staller, Dr. Burns, their nameplates on the door. I get to her office, and her nameplate says Ms. Edwards. Or did it say Miss Edwards or Ms. Edwards? Do you remember this?
I think it just said K.L. Edwards. And didn't have anything.
No doctor. So how could this happen? It turns out it was very hard to know what to do with women faculty. And I think it has something to do with the Kenyon community or Kenyon community. Harleen Marley, who died recently, I just learned, and who had joined the drama department almost a decade before Rin and I arrived, said in a 1999 interview, if there was a big lecture or that kind of thing, faculty wives had always baked the cookies and made the dips and put out the vegetable trays and one thing and another. And I was frequently asked to bake cookies for events, and male faculty members never were. Now, Harleen was referring to one dimension of the way in which the idea of the Kenyon community, and indeed the reality of the Kenyon community, was constituted when we arrived. In this community, real professors were men, and their heterosexual, of course, partners were faculty wives. Also, because female students were the equals of male students, they were the same as male students. And also, I must add that administrators were men and women were secretaries. Now, like the myth of the traditional family, which feminist historians have done battle with, this paradigm of the Kenyan community bears a little more scrutiny. And I want to say a couple of words about that before speaking about my Kenyan community. The first thing is about faculty wives. Some of them did bake cookies, and I think it was Sue that just earlier referred to going to dinner at professors' houses. They made dinner also, normally. They baked cookies, by which I mean unpaid. They provided absolutely crucial structures for intellectual exchange on the social basis of respect and trust. It may have been a paternalistic system, but it was a structure that represented many good things about Kenyan at that moment. Now, some faculty wives had jobs and identities beyond Kenyan, even sometimes beyond the 10-mile rule within which we were all required to live. Others were lifting heavy loads as administrators, often part-time and underpaid. I would say mostly part-time and underpaid. And then there were some faculty wives who were long-term, non-tenure track members of the faculty. That is, they taught courses, I think, of Elizabeth Ward and Dorothy Jagla and Norma Elliott, and there were others. I think Buffy referred to those people in the earlier session. I don't know what their nameplates said. Another element of this imagined Kenyan community was the androgynous student. And I have to say, just right off, of course, women students can find role models and mentors in male faculty members. I did, perhaps Rin did, many of us had to. We didn't have any choice. But there were many students for whom the male professor, male student relationship was not the same as the male professor, female student relationship, and they felt marginalized and or felt a sense of individual need. I was rummaging around in a box in my garage labeled KC Women, and I found an undated note from a student. I know it was before 1984. And it said, I am enrolled in History 1112 and am very anxious to get into your section. I realize that student preferences are not usually taken into account, but I'm a senior with a limited amount of courses left and would like to take a woman professor. Since I'm an economics major with concentrations in math and physics, all three depths are 100% male, I have not had much opportunity to study under a woman professor. Like it's studying under a professor, which is the 19th century. In addition to the individual sense of need, there seemed to be a collective sense of need among students. And while faculty and administrators were tussling over who was going to control what aspect of the college, women students had become activists. And they were promoting the hiring of more women faculty. And they were promoting the incorporation of women into the curriculum and the study of women as a legitimate academic enterprise, as well as pushing back against the fraternity's domination of social life and student government, and as well as providing leadership in a lot of student organizations, such as the Gay Advocate Group, as it was originally called. Obviously, it morphed into the Lesbian Gay Student Association, and by the time I left, the Lesbian Gay Bi Student Association. So these are some elements of what the Kenyan community was supposed to be, and how it was a little different from the way it was supposed to be. But for me, women's studies was what provided a differently configured community. And I have to say, the history department was wonderful, and my colleagues all participated in examining and revising the history curriculum. But the interdisciplinary collaboration that surrounded the creation of the INDS 1-2 course, the first Women's Studies course, was central for me. We had a summer institute with a nationally prominent women's studies scholar. We had a reading group in which we discussed research and theory and pedagogy. We had an ongoing collaboration with women's studies students and faculty and regular annual meetings through the Great Lakes College Association. Does that still exist?
Yes.
Yeah. And we even had a relationship with some high school teachers who were interested in incorporating material about women into their courses. More than a dozen, I think probably many more than a dozen faculty, administrators, librarians participated as regulars, guests, resource people in this course. And I think we made a course that was really very different from others. Rita has mentioned one of the ways in which it was, including small details that made a difference by conveying something about our approach to learning. I was reminded when I was rummaging through this box in my garage that Rin had the second semester syllabus printed on lavender paper. Yes. Things changed very quickly starting in the early 80s. Kenyon seemed to be overrun by women faculty. Of course, we were really just a small percentage, but the percentage was growing fast. I think Irene maybe has some stats that she'll give us. Women's studies was so powerful that it threatened to undermine the entire principle of liberal arts education. Lo and behold, some faculty wives who've been teaching for a long time got regular positions, and I suppose that what the nameplate on their door would have changed, on their doors would have changed. Conditions obviously changed for women's students, but we've had former students speaking of that, and others will speak later. It's clear at least that some found a mentor and a role model as well as a teacher in Rin. But it wasn't enough, and by the time I left in 1996, in spite of some efforts at solidarity and a few reclassifications and promotions and hires, we still really hadn't made a dent in the administration staff hierarchies, I think. Another thing, by the time I left, I believe there was only one woman of color on the faculty. And although by comparing the women's studies syllabi from one year to the next, you can see us making a valiant effort, led by Rin, I have to say, to make women's studies inclusive. The fact is, if you look at the results, they were inadequate. So it was not enough by the time I left, but then after I left, something happened and I'm waiting for the sequel.
I think that's your cue.
I'll certainly do what I can to follow up. Actually, I didn't have pencil and paper with me, so I've been taking notes on my phone. And have had many things in the things that Rita and Joan have said have resonated with me. I do feel to some extent that maybe my role as a physicist, I've come to a lot of this quite late. And so some of this actually just recovers the trend that they've mentioned as it was coming into some of the sciences where women just were not represented very much. When I came into Kenyon in 1992, I think there were still a lot of undercurrents of, you know, what are women doing, what is the role of women, but they were not overt. I did not experience the same amount of having to come in and just invent things. There were women who had been department chairs, there were women who had been committee chairs, all of that had happened, and I was the benefactor. I benefited from all of those roads that were already trod. But there were still concerns. I remember when I was a candidate, and Rita, you may have been on that search. I know. Thank you very much. One of the traditions that we still have is that women candidates have a luncheon with other women who are not on the search committee, who don't have any role on the search committee. Most of my meetings were with one or two people at a time. When I walked into my lunch with women faculty at Kenyon, there were, I think, between 12 and 15 women there, okay? And I think that to some extent it was a concern because the department I was being hired in physics, was trying to find a woman. And they wanted to know that there were women here who were successful. They wanted me to know that they had my back. When I got to campus, some of the first people who contacted me, as I recall, were Joan and Rita, asking me to go to lunch, wanting to talk with me, wanting to make sure that I knew that I had resources. In the sciences, Rin has always been an advisor and a friend and a mentor, and I am just so happy that we're doing this now. So what I remember, or some of the things I remember, when I came in, there was a group running called COSIN. It was a consortium with some Ohio colleges and some colleges in the Carolinas, and I was invited to start working with COSIN. It was a group that was supporting women and underrepresented minorities who wanted to be in the sciences. We had some money for programming. We bought lots of, pizza and cookies. We developed a middle school outreach program for several years. And it was the sort of thing that it was never on my radar as an undergraduate or graduate student. So coming to Kenyon and actually being involved with a support group for women was new to me, and being put in a role where I was the mentor instead of the one to be mentored was interesting. At that stage, I feel like we had a community in the science departments, a community of women who were interested in dialogue and in talking across departments. I remember conversations with Joan when I first came in. I remember talking with Rin when she found out that we could do video motion stuff. She wanted to figure out how to track motion in plants. And we were used to, tracking motion in projectiles, so plants, you gotta go really slowly with that video. So I feel like there was a community of people who were talking around the discipline and collaborating, and I got to become part of that community. I also think that there was sort of at that point, we had gotten to the point where we had a critical mass of women students in the disciplines. And the COSIN group was nice, particularly for me and for the students who were studying physics who were women, because there might be only one or two women per class year in physics, but with the COSIN group, you were around other women who were interested in chemistry or mathematics or biology, and so you got a little bit bigger cohort of people with whom you were associating, or with whom you were discussing some of the issues. One of the interesting things I've read in terms of research on women in the sciences is that it's possible for women to have male role models. It's certainly good for folks to talk about the role of women in science, but the single thing that has the most effect on retaining women in sciences is to talk explicitly about what sorts of things might be challenging, normalize that challenge and that sense that at every point, or at some point anyway, almost everyone will feel as if they got in by fluke. It's what's called the imposter syndrome. I really didn't deserve this position, they just gave it to me because I was a woman. Oh, all the boys in my class are so much smarter, they're always answering questions. Do I really belong? So talking explicitly about those ideas is really the best thing that we can do. And that's what groups like COSIN and Women's Net and Hack SWAC and all of these acronyms for ways in which women got together. I don't even remember what PACTWAC stands for.
Status of women in Kenya.
Say it again, too.
President's Advisory Committee on the Status of Women at Kenya.
Thank you. Those were the groups where we were doing that talking. That talking about, you know, why am I here and do I deserve this? And the answer is always yes. There's something we each have to give, something we each have to bring, and trying to normalize both difference, whether it's religious preference or sexual preference or sexuality and any sort of difference, brings a perspective to science that improves and enhances our ability to think of new and creative ways of doing what we do. And that's a big lesson that I learned. I had no idea what feminism was. I went to a university where I studied physics and math all the time. And then I went to graduate school where I did more physics and more math more of the time. And so when I landed here, I started my liberal arts college education. And my teachers have been my colleagues and my students. And that's really the state in which, or the story I have to tell. I'm still in the process of becoming. And I think women in the sciences are still in the process of becoming. This is now year 2 of the first year of my 25-year career when there is another woman tenure track teaching in the physics department. So we're still in process. We have 2, 3, sometimes 4 women majors in physics, out of an average of about 9 majors a year. Our banner year was 1998. I call it a vintage year. We have 11 majors, and only 3 of them were white guys. There are 5 women in that class, and I'm still in touch with every single one of them at some level. Some of them just by Facebook, others of them when I'm in their town, I visit them. When they're here, they visit me. So I think we're still in the process of becoming, but I like the distance that we've come.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'll do what I do in my class. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There we go. All right. I'm Professor Lopez. I'm here to talk about the transformation of women, so I've been told. And I have a PowerPoint. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to you about the status of women here at Kenyon. And I'm going to be presenting some research that I got from Tom Stamp. So I want to thank him. But if there are any errors in my PowerPoint, then you talk to Tom Stamp. I present this presentation as a thank you to you. As I was doing the research on this, it was a bit depressing being out there, and also, so I don't know you as well as I know other faculty, but I can only imagine the difficulties of being over here, and the sciences in particular. And when I think about the type of perseverance and the kind of eat nails kind of personality that one needs to persist, I just want to thank you. And I also want to present this talk as kind of a love letter to my daughter, who is here, because the world is as big as you want it to be. Okay. So I come at this a little bit differently. First gen in my family, minority woman, and I went to undergrad at Vassar. You may have heard of it. And it was just the most pro-feminist place to be. Right, and so it was wonderful, wonderful, kind of all surrounded by that. And as many faculty members here at Kenyon, a lot of us have been at come from liberal arts institutions. And so I always say, like, we drank the Kool-Aid and we want to kind of go back to that. So I was always drawn to getting a position at a liberal arts institution. And it was really important for me to be at a place where I felt free, where I could breathe here. And despite some of the difficulties I'll talk about women here at Kenyon, I have found that this is a place where I can have those moments when I can breathe and feel free. And in large part, I think it's because of my particular department. So some of this you've probably already been kind of exposed to. Let's talk about women at Kenyon here. So as was said earlier, the decision to kind of bring women on board as students here in college were really for financial reasons, right, as I've understood. Kenyon was near bankruptcy in the 1960s. And through several meetings, they decided that the time has come, right, to jump into the 20th century and to think about opening up the college to women. So we were brought here as cash cows, right? So at the time when they were thinking about kind of admitting women as students and thinking about kind of expanding, they also had some female faculty coming from Bennington College, and this is all freely available on the web. And these women also advised the college on different ways that we can be teaching, right? And because of them, we got the introduction of the pass-fail option, we have the synoptic major, and the introduction of kind of independent study as well there. This is an ad from Time magazine in 1967 that was put out to come all ye young women to Kenyon on there. And what I found just really kind of amusing, so of course you're going to have an ad trying to attract women and you're going to have perfume on there, right? Because that's why you choose to go to a college, because you know it smells good, right? And so they ran this ad, and then in September 8, 1969, was the opening day, at least for the women's college. I was only 3 months old. Right? And when the women's college opened, it was known as the skirt school, right? And so you have all of the usual kind of discussions that you would have when a place is beginning to become co-ed, right? Are we going to lower the standards here? Is this really what we want to do with having women here? Okay, so that is a little bit about bringing women as students. Now, if we shift to discussion about women teaching here at Kenyon, what we know is that prior to the introduction of female students on campus, there were women who were teaching here at Kenyon. They were not part of the tenure track faculty, however. Some names, for example, what we have in drama and art, we have Helen Black and Kathryn Rice. And then in math, it's a little bit kind of unclear of the dates, but as early possibly as 1941, we had a female faculty teaching there. And we had some other female faculty members that were teaching in math as well. Again, but not officially part of the tenure track faculty. We begin to talk about the introduction of women tenure track faculty with someone like Sylvia Bernard at Classics. And what I want to do here is kind of give you some names and just to show you how the trajectory has been. You see this progression, but I think what you're going to see is it wasn't easy coming here. So how long does Bernard last here? All of 1 year here. After Bernard, we had Marley, who comes. She's the first woman to be granted tenure and the first to be going to full professor. Following after these two women, we have a host of other women, and I have data here, and I won't bore you with reading all this, but a consistent motif comes up. Women come, they stay for a year, and they say, no thank you, I'm going to leave. They come in various positions. They come sometimes visiting. Sometimes they come, and they are denied tenure, as in the case of Marcia Rocky Sherman in philosophy, who also brought a gender discrimination suit against women. So, with increasing frequency, we see the introduction of women here, predominantly in the humanities that they're coming in, some of the social sciences, coming up with some difficulties. Other women also come and they resign, or they leave. In the sciences, when do we begin to have some kind of foothold as to what's going within my own department in psychology, we have Virginia Grace Kasparas, comes in, and Marilyn Stacy Lethbridge. But guess what? They also both leave after a year there. So there must be something in the water kind of going on where folks are leaving. And then we have in biology, Myra Joan Larson came in, but after 3 years was not tenured. So, into these potentially hostile waters, I would imagine, we have Bryn Edward who comes in. And comes in into a climate where there are women who are coming, but there are women who are leaving. And I cannot even imagine this sense of isolation and one and only feeling there. As what was said earlier, we know that one of the best ways that we can retain and also one of the factors in predicting wellness is how much you feel embedded in your community, how much support you have. And just by this very kind of quick overview, what we see is that I would imagine this was a potentially really difficult place to be, and particularly to be a woman in the sciences. And so Bryn Edward comes, she joins the faculty in 1978, awarded tenure in 1985, and becomes professor in 1992 there. Since this time, we have a total of 17 women in the sciences, so 17 women who have been tenured in the sciences. One of them has died, one of them has left, and now with Bryn Edward's retirement, we can have that down to a whopping 14 women in the sciences. These are the women according to department. We have currently biology, we have 5, which is a pretty healthy representation. In chemistry, we have 2. In mathematics, we have 3, including Marie Snipes, who is the most recent woman to have been granted tenure at our institution. In physics, we have Paula, one and only, in the department there. Hopefully not, to say. And in my department, drum roll. Okay, so this, I'm actually really proud and excited about because of all of the departments represented in the natural sciences, the psychology department, despite the difficulties we've had in the very beginning to get women and to have them stay, and frankly, also, despite the fact that we have had a difficult time recruiting minority women there. Some of you may not know that the position that I hold now, the 2 people before me did not get tenure, and one of them was an African American woman. I did not find that out until I accepted there, and I was like, what happened here? This is a sinkhole? What's going on? So you can imagine my trepidation when I found this out. However, despite these difficulties, we have the highest number of women who are tenured in the sciences. As a woman in the sciences, or as a woman in general in academia, sometimes you have these moments, you know, not only in addition to the imposter syndrome, you ask yourself, why am I here? I'm first gen Puerto Rican from the Bronx. I ask myself that a lot living in Gambier. Like, what can I do, right? And I am here to tell you that the reason, despite those moments, you know, when you're thinking, is this the right place for me? I am here because of my department here. Sarah Vernon is here, who's our chair. I'm going to get very emotional now. Sarah was, as I understand, instrumental to helping us get a child care center here. When people say, why are you here? I often joke that I'm here because I work in a matriarchy. And coming from Vassar, where I felt that I could breathe, I feel in my department that I am surrounded by women and men who are feministly oriented and friendly there. In our department, so how have we changed? In our department meetings, it is not unusual for there to be children there. We bring each other, we have toys in department meetings. If a child is sick, it is not unusual for, at times, for one department member to hold that child while the other department member can speak there. When I went to graduate school and I had my son, the joke was that you did not want to have your child seen. And so the faculty member would come down, you pushed them in the closet, right? So they wouldn't be seen, because you wanted to be seen as competent, right? That is not the case. When I interviewed here in Kenyon, I interviewed with Dana Credden and Linda Smollett. Dana was pregnant during the interview. And I remember at one point in the interview, we were laughing so hard that Dana said, "We should be asking you interview questions, shouldn't we?" There. And it was a warmth that I had not felt in a very long time when I was on the job market. And I remember going back and saying, I think this is the place. This is the place where I feel strong as a woman. My department consistently contributes to the Women and Gender Studies department. My department chair, Sam Vernon, was supportive of me when I worked with 2 other Latinos on campus to start the Latino Studies concentration. As part of our curriculum, we teach cross-cultural psyching, we teach Latino psych, and we teach psychology of women. So we are making strides. Are we where we should be? No. But we have come a long way, baby. When we compare this to tenured men in the sciences, currently there are 32 when you count all of the folks versus 17 for women. Minority men in the sciences, we have 6. When we revise those totals to think about, not including MRI professors and those who are deceased, we have 21 currently tenured men in the sciences compared to 14 women in the sciences. This is the full list of women in the sciences chronologically. When we think back on the reasons for bringing women on board as students, the idea of kind of being a cash cow and maybe make Kenyon more viable. What we find is out of this list, 8 of us have received teaching awards. So this is a pretty bunch of slackers that we have here. And so I guess my contribution to this is to say that I think how do we continue to attract women to Kenya, but particularly women in the sciences. I think I want to echo what was said earlier, which is we have to think about what their needs are. So women in the sciences, we have obviously many of the same needs that women just generally in academia have, right? The caregiving, right? Providing opportunities for caregiving, providing opportunities to write, right? So being creative in the types of faculty development grants, for example, that we might have, that would encourage that. Mentorship as well. And also, how do we attract students, making our coursework salient and relevant there. In psychology, I often talk about how, psychology is a science, right? We look at the science of behavior. We're not being good scientists when our participants are only from one particular part of the world there. And so diversity in experiences and diversity in representation of our subject pool, for example, makes us better scientists. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you.
Now it's an open discussion. Everyone is welcome to comment, question, converse.
Tom's dad in the room? Oh, too bad. Not 1988, 1998 was when I got tenure.
Well, I think we're at a point right now in terms of the history that we just listened to. I think we're now turning into the age where it is the age for women's diversity. Yes, we need to sort of fill in and bring in more women, I think, in the sciences, but we need to bring the diversity of women. And I think that's where it's people like Irene that are going to be leading the changes that are going to be significant to Kenyon in its next future story.
Can I say something? It's to Rin, who I haven't gotten to say hello to yet. And actually, many of the women faculty who are here. I was a chemistry major. I graduated in '93. my senior year, the first female chemistry professor started, who evidently is now a veterinarian. But I was one of your assistants, and I worked in your lab, I organized your books. And since leaving Kenyon, I regularly attend things and have attended things since I graduated where I feel like the rest of the world is sort of, oh my God, blown away and is having these consciousness moments, and I'm like, shh, I learned that at Kenyon. And I think that like some of them, because I was class of '93, so this is already old, but like when the vagina monologues were all everywhere, I went and I was like, oh, yeah, Rin taught me all of that. And like 2 years ago, only 2 years ago, I paid a lot of money to hear Neil deGrasse Tyson speak, and he's amazing, and his entire lecture was, we need to promote women in the sciences. That was his entire talk. And we left, and I was like, I learned nothing. I learned nothing at that talk. Everybody around me was like, wow, he was amazing, wow. And I'm so glad that it was a consciousness-raising event for the hundreds of people there. But for me, and I'm really glad about this too, Rita Kipp had already taught me all of that. And Mary Lee had already taught me all of that. And Rin Edwards had already taught me all of that. And I feel like I'm so freaking thankful that I had you as a professor. You have made me a better person, all of you, like everyone here who, Liz Foreman, Jamie Peely, I mean, I cannot thank you enough, and I thought I should tell you in front of everyone.
I also want to say that Hannah ended up going into a career that even in that day, 1993, which for an elderly person seems not that long ago, was pretty much all male dominated. She went into medicine.
And it's not as nice as you're, like, I'm a pediatrician. We don't get sick days. Our kids, if they're sick, we're screwed. And all this is like, God, I want to work here. But yeah, the rest of the world still has huge strides to make in medicine and in other fields. But I adore the professors I had here, and thank you. I mean,
One more?
I don't know, I'll make a comment rather than, I still have lots of ideas. One of the ideas, so many of you took my female sexuality class.
Yes.
Biology, sexuality, yes. And I have, probably that's my longest standing course here, other than Introduction to Experimental Biology. I want to say that I taught the last class last semester, and there's some students here who were in that class, and I got comments from that class that are exactly the same comments I got when I first taught it in the 90s. And you know what that comment is? The comment is, I had no idea that my body actually moves during sex. You know, that my vagina moves, my uterus moves. I'm a dynamic woman. I actually have something to contribute to sex. The reason we do not know about our bodies is because sex education in our high schools in the United States is abysmal. And this course is not being offered again. Kenyon needs to stand up and set an example for the rest of the country and become a leader in offering good sex education program here at Kenyon.
I will second that. I just want to say my freshman in Quest for Justice last year, when we were, I don't know, reading something about feminism and the study between, I think it was the Dutch and the Americans and what our sex ed is like, they said their mom tells them about birth control, their dad makes lame jokes. And I said, is this the 70s? Right? So this literally is, they are becoming ignorant.
So we have some directions. How much time? What's the time span?
What is our time span, Jan?
That we have, it's 2:03, we have the next panel starting at 2:15, when you will hear from Ren students who have gone into careers in science. So a nice segue, and we take a few minutes of a break so people can stretch their legs, go to the bathroom, get some water. And the guest book is here, we'll have it here all afternoon and downstairs at the reception, and please, please, please take a little time and write your notes. This is sort of the memory book. So let's thank the panel and take a break.